blood hits the sand before the scream comes. Not loud, not heroic, just a wet, choking gasp under a sky that doesn't care. The man drops to his knees, eyes wide, like he's trying to understand how death found him so fast and who sent it. Because this wasn't chaos, this was planned. And somewhere in the shadows of the arena, a man watches, unmoved. Ashur, not a warrior, not a hero, something far more dangerous. A survivor. The crowd roars, but he doesn't even blink. His fingers tighten slightly around the edge of the stone balcony, calm, calculating. He's not here for spectacle, he's here for control. Every drop of blood below? A message. Every death? A step. But here's the thing. Ashur was never meant to have power. He was the one mocked. Beaten. Broken. So how did he end up here, above everyone? The answer begins long before the arena. Back when chains were still fresh on his wrists, and hope hadn't died yet. The desert wind burns. Sand scratches against skin already torn open from punishment. Ashur walks in a line of slaves, each step heavier than the last. No one speaks, no one dares, because ahead of them stands something worse than death. Expectation. He watches the others carefully, strong men, fighters, gladiators in the making. And then there's him, smaller, quieter, watching, always watching. He learns quickly. Strength gets attention. Attention gets you killed. So he chooses something else. Invisibility. But invisibility has a cost. It means swallowing humiliation, taking blows without retaliation, laughing when they mock you. Bleeding, silently. And Ashur does all of it. Until the day he realizes something no one else does. The real power isn't in the arena. It's behind it. Inside the whispers. The deals. The secrets traded in dark corners. That's where men truly fall. And rise. One night, long after the torches dim, Ashur hears something he shouldn't. Two guards, drunk, careless, talking about a man marked for death, not in combat, but by betrayal. Ashur freezes. This is it. A choice. Stay silent, survive another day as nothing, or speak and become something else entirely. His heart pounds. Loud. Too loud. This is a mistake. He knows it. But he steps forward anyway. And everything changes. The next morning, the man meant to die is already gone. Quietly. Efficiently. Like he never existed. But someone notices. Someone always notices. Ashur is summoned. Not to the arena. To a room with no windows. The air smells different here. Not blood, not sweat, power. A Roman sits across from him, eyes sharp, amused. The kind of man who sees through lies before they're spoken. Ashur kneels, waits. Every second stretches. Then, a smile. Not kind, not warm, interested. And that's worse. Because interest means opportunity, or danger. Tell me, the Roman says softly, how does a man like you hear things meant to stay hidden? Ashur doesn't answer immediately. He calculates. Every word matters now. Too much truth? He dies. Too little? He's useless. So he does what he does best. He gives just enough. And it works. The Roman leans back, studying him like a tool he's deciding whether to use or discard. And then he says something that changes everything. Perhaps you are more valuable than you appear. Valuable. The word echoes. For the first time, Ashur feels it. Not hope. Something colder. Ambition. From that moment, the game shifts. He's no longer just surviving. He's learning. Listening. Manipulating. Listening. Manipulating. Feeding information where it benefits him most. One whisper at a time. And slowly, the invisible man becomes necessary. But necessity breeds enemies. The gladiators begin to notice. The way punishments fall too precisely. The way Ashur always seems untouched when others suffer. Eyes follow him now. Suspicion grows. And suspicion is deadly. One night, as the camp sleeps, a shadow moves. Closer. Closer. Ashur wakes to the sound of breath that isn't his own. A blade glints in the dark. And for the first time, he doesn't have a plan. The blade doesn't strike immediately. It lingers, just inches from his throat. Close enough for Ashur to feel the cold whisper of steel against his skin. Close enough to smell the man holding it. Sweat, iron, rage. He doesn't move, doesn't breathe. Because movement means death. I know what you are, the voice hisses. Low, controlled, dangerous. A gladiator, one of the strongest, the kind men cheer for, the kind who kills clean. But tonight, this isn't the arena, this is personal. Ashur's mind races. No weapon, no escape, no time. Think. The blade presses harder. A single drop of blood slides down his neck. Traitor, the man whispers. There it is. The truth, or at least what they believe. Ashur swallows slowly, careful, calculated. If I wanted you dead, he murmurs, voice barely above breath, you wouldn't be here holding that blade. Silence. Just for a second. But it's enough. Doubt. Tiny. Fragile. But real. He feels it. And he pushes. You're alive, Ashur continues softly. Which means I chose not to speak your name. A lie. Or maybe not entirely. That's the trick. The gladiator hesitates. Grip tightens, then loosens just slightly. Ashur shifts his eyes, not to the blade, to the man. You think I betray men like you, he says, quieter now. Strong, respected. A pause. Then, I betray men who think they're untouchable. The words land heavy, because every man here fears the same thing, falling. The blade pulls back a fraction. Breath returns. Slow. Careful. Ashur doesn't smile. Not yet. You kill me, he adds, and tomorrow someone else whispers your name. Now the thought is planted. Not fear of Ashur, fear of the system, of unseen eyes, hidden deals, endless games. The gladiator steps back, just one step. But it's everything. Ashur sits up slowly, hand brushing the thin line of blood at his throat. He looks at it, then at the man, alive, again. But understand this, the gladiator growls, backing into shadow. If I fall, I take you with me. Then he's gone, just like that. Silence returns, but it's different now. Hearts don't stop racing that quickly. Ashur exhales, deep, shaky. That was close. Too close. Too close. Too close. Too close. And for the first time, he feels it. Not control, not calculation. Fear. Real fear. Because the game is changing. He's no longer invisible. He's a target. Morning comes harsh. The sun burns hotter. The air feels heavier. Eyes linger longer than before. Word spreads without words. They know, or at least they suspect. Ashur walks through the camp, slower now. Measured. Every step watched. Every movement judged. And then, a hand grabs his shoulder. Hard. He turns. Not a gladiator, a guard. Come. No explanation, no choice. Ashur follows. Through corridors he's never walked before. Past doors that stay closed, past men who don't look at him but know exactly who he is. They reach the same room. No windows. That smell again. Power. The Roman sits where he always does. Calm. Untouchable. But today, there's something else. Expectation. You're becoming noticed, the Roman says, almost amused. Ashur says nothing. He's learning when silence speaks louder. Dangerous position, the man continues. For someone like you. A beat. Then, unless you embrace it. Ashur's eyes flicker, just slightly. The Roman sees everything. There's a problem, he says, leaning forward. There's a problem, he says, leaning forward. A gladiator. Strong, popular, difficult to control. Ashur already knows. Of course he does. And I need him. Removed. There it is. Not a request, not even an order. A test. Ashur feels his pulse quicken. Because this is different. This isn't whispering anymore. This is direct. Visible, deadly. If he dies in the arena, the Roman continues, it's spectacle. But if he dies, another way, he lets the sentence hang. Incomplete, but clear. Ashur's mind spins. If he succeeds, he rises. If he fails, he dies. And if he refuses, he doesn't even finish that thought, because refusal was never an option. The Roman smiles again, that same cold, interested smile. Prove your worth. Silence, heavy, crushing. Ashur nods, just once. And in that moment, something shifts inside him. A line crossed. No going back. He leaves the room slower than he entered. But everything feels faster now. Sharper. More dangerous. Because now, he's not just playing the game, he's becoming part of it. And the target? The strongest gladiator in the camp. The one no man can defeat. The one who almost killed him last night. Ashur stops walking, just for a second. Closes his eyes. This is impossible. This is suicide. This is opportunity. When he opens them again, the fear is still there. But something else has taken its place. Something colder, more focused. A plan is already forming. Because if there's one thing Ashur understands better than anyone, it's that even the strongest men have something to lose. Ashur doesn't sleep that night, not even for a second. The camp breathes around him, low snores, chains shifting, distant footsteps. But his mind refuses to slow. Every path he sees ends the same way. Dead. Not the gladiator. Him. Because this isn't a fight you win with strength. It's a game of angles, pressure, timing. And the man he's meant to kill, he has none of those weaknesses. At dawn, the arena awakens. Dust rises. Steel clashes. Men train like beasts preparing for slaughter. And there he is, the target. Towering, unshaken, every movement precise, efficient, untouchable. Ashur watches from a distance, eyes scanning, dissecting. Not the strikes, not the power, the pauses, the moments between. Because that's where truth hides. And then he sees it. Small, almost nothing. He sees it. Small, almost nothing. But it's there. A hesitation. Just before the gladiator finishes his opponent, there's a flicker in his eyes. Not doubt, not fear. Something else. Recognition. Ashur leans forward slightly. What was that? The answer comes later. Not in the arena, but outside it. A boy, no older than 10, sneaking near the gladiator quarters, clutching something wrapped in cloth. Guards shout. The boy freezes. Terrified. And then? The unstoppable warrior steps in. Leave him. Just 2 words. But everything changes. The guards hesitate, then back off. The boy runs to him, fast, desperate. And the gladiator, this monster in the arena, kneels. Gently. Ashur watches, hidden. The boy unwraps the cloth. Bread. Hard. Stale. But offered like treasure. The gladiator takes it. Not as a king. As a king. As a father. And suddenly, the impossible becomes clear. Weakness. Not in muscle. In heart. Ashur steps back into shadow, mind racing. This changes everything. Strength can't be broken, head on. But love? Love can be used. The plan begins to take shape. Not fast, careful, precise. He starts small, whispers, nothing direct, just enough to move pieces. A guard here, a rumor there. The boy's presence, noticed. Tracked. Days pass. Tension builds. The gladiator doesn't see it. Or maybe he does, but it's already too late. Because one evening, the boy doesn't arrive. Ashur watches from a distance as the warrior waits. Minutes stretch, shadows grow longer. No footsteps, no small figure running through dust, nothing. And for the first time, the gladiator looks uncertain. Just a crack. But it's enough. That night, Ashur moves. Through corridors, through silence, through the parts of the camp no one watches closely enough. He finds the boy, locked away, afraid, alive. Good. Because dead would end this too quickly. Ashur kneels in front of him, calm, soft. I'm here to help, he whispers. The boy doesn't trust him. Smart. Ashur doesn't force it. He simply places the bread beside him. The same kind the boy brought before. Familiar. Safe. Your father, Ashur says quietly, he's in danger. The word hits. Danger. The boy's eyes widen. Hook set. I can protect him, Ashur continues. But I need your help. Silence. Heavy. Then, a nod. Small, fragile, but real. Ashur stands slowly, and in that moment, something shifts again. This isn't survival anymore, this is control. The next day, everything is ready. The arena fills. The crowd roars. Blood demands to be spilled. The gladiator steps forward, unaware. But not for long, because across the arena, Ashur stands. Not hidden this time, visible, watching. And in his hand, a piece of cloth. Small, wrapped, the same one the boy carried. The gladiator sees it. Freezes, just for a second. But in the arena, a second is death. The opponent lunges. Steel flashes. And for the first time, the unstoppable man is too late. The blade lands. Not clean, not perfect, but enough. Steel tears across flesh, and the arena erupts, cheers exploding like thunder. But Ashur doesn't hear any of it. He's watching one thing. The man. The giant who never fell, now stumbling. Blood spills. Dark against the sand. The gladiator drops to one knee, breath ragged, eyes searching. Not for his opponent, for the cloth, for the truth. And when his gaze locks onto Ashur, everything clicks. Betrayal. Raw. Violent. Unforgiving. The kind that doesn't fade. Ashur doesn't look away. He can't. This was the plan. This had to happen. But something twists inside him anyway. Ignore it. The opponent strikes again. Fast. Brutal. No hesitation this time. The wounded gladiator tries to rise. Too slow. Steel drives deep. Silence. Just for a heartbeat. Then the crowd roars louder than before. Another legend falls. But this one feels different. Because as the life drains from his body, the gladiator doesn't look at the man who killed him. He looks at Ashur. And even from across the arena, that stare says everything. Not anger, not fear, disappointment. That hits harder. Ashur turns away. Too late. It's already done. That night, the camp celebrates. Wine flows. Victories are shouted into the dark. Another spectacle complete. But Ashur sits alone. The noise doesn't reach him, because something is wrong. This was supposed to feel like power, like victory. So why does it feel like a mistake? No, he mutters it under his breath. Sharp, immediate. This is survival. This is what it takes. Feelings are weakness, and weakness gets you killed. A shadow moves at the edge of his vision. Ashur's head snaps up. A guard. Come. Again, no explanation. But this time, Ashur already knows. The room feels smaller now, or maybe it's him. The Roman watches him differently tonight. Not curious. Certain. Well done, he says, almost casually. Ashur doesn't respond. He's waiting, because rewards always come with cost. You've proven something valuable, the Roman continues, rising slowly. You understand leverage. A pause. Then, I have another task. Of course he does. Ashur's jaw tightens slightly. Spartacus. The name lands like a strike. Heavy, dangerous, different. Even Ashur knows it. Everyone does. Spartacus isn't just a gladiator. He's a symbol. Hope. Rebellion. And men like that don't die easily. The Roman steps closer. Eyes locked. I want you near him. Not kill. Not yet. Something worse. Earn his trust. Earn his trust. Er's breath slows. Careful. Measured. Because this is a different game entirely. You've shown you can break a man, the Roman says softly. Now I want you to break something bigger. A movement outside. Distant. Faint. Voices. Not celebration. Not laughter. Anger. Ashur hears it. So does the Roman. They both turn slightly, listening. Because something is shifting. Not in the arena. Not in whispers. Out there. In the hearts of men who are starting to question everything. The Roman smiles. Not worried. Excited. Change is coming, he says. But Ashur doesn't feel excitement. He feels it. That same cold sensation creeping back. Not fear. Something worse. Uncertainty. Because for the first time, the game isn't controlled. Not fully. And when systems start to crack, men like him either rise higher than ever before or get crushed beneath it. Ashur leaves the room slower than before. The corridors feel different. Heavier. Like the walls themselves are holding secrets. Outside, the air is thick. Voices carry. Gladiators speaking in low tones. Urgent. Dangerous. The death in the arena didn't end something. It started it. Ashur steps into the shadows, watching, listening, learning. Because now, it's not just about survival. It's about choosing a side. And the problem is, for the first time, he's not sure which side wins. In the distance, a name rises above the whispers. Spartacus. Again and again. Louder each time, like a storm building. Ashur closes his eyes for a second. Just one. This is bigger than him. Bigger than any single move. And yet, he's already inside it. Deep. Too deep. When he opens his eyes again, that cold focus returns. Because no matter how big the storm becomes, he'll do what he always does. Adapt. Manipulate. Survive. Even if it means betraying something far greater than one man. Even if it means betraying an entire rebellion. The chants don't stop. Spartacus. Spartacus. They echo through stone, through iron, through men who were once silent. And that's what makes it dangerous. Not the name itself, the belief behind it. Ashur walks through the camp, slower now, eyes sharper. This isn't noise anymore. It's movement. A shift in the air, like before a storm when everything feels wrong. And then he sees him. Spartacus. Not in the arena. Not fighting. Just standing among the others. Talking. Listening. That's what makes him powerful. Men don't just follow his strength. They trust him. Ashur studies him from a distance. Every gesture, every word, he expects arrogance, pride. But there's none. Only purpose. And that's harder to break. Ashur approaches carefully, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to seem harmless. Invisible again. I've heard your name, Ashur says quietly. Spartacus turns. His eyes don't judge. They measure. You hear many things, Spartacus replies. Calm, steady, dangerous in a different way. Ashur gives a slight nod. Some things are worth listening to. A pause. Then Spartacus steps closer, close enough that Ashur feels it, that presence, not physical power, conviction, not physical power, conviction. You serve them, Spartacus says, not accusing, just true. Ashur doesn't deny it, because denial would be weakness. I survive, he answers. Spartacus watches him, long, silent. Then, there's a difference. The words linger, because Ashur knows he's not wrong. Because Ashur knows he's not wrong, but survival is all he has, or at least it was. Days pass. Ashur stays close. Not obvious. Never obvious. Never obvious. He listens to Spartacus speak to the others. About freedom, about unity, about breaking chains that no one believed could be broken. And the worst part? It works. Men change around him. Stronger, braver. Hope spreads like fire. And Ashur feels it too. Just a flicker. Just for a moment. But it's there, and it terrifies him. Because hope makes people reckless. Hope gets people killed. The Roman's voice echoes in his mind. Break something bigger. Ashur knows what he has to do. But this time, it's not simple. Because Spartacus isn't weak. Not in heart, not in mind. So Ashur looks deeper, and he finds it. Not a person, not a child. Something else. Trust. Spartacus trusts his men. All of them. That's the weakness. Ashur begins to move. Slowly. He feeds small truths, not lies. He feeds small truths, not lies. Never obvious lies. Just enough to guide thoughts. Shift suspicion. Create cracks where there were none. A missing weapon. A misplaced key. A whispered doubt. And then, a name. One of Spartacus's closest allies. Planted carefully, like a seed. Days later, tension rises. Voices grow sharper. Glances linger longer. The unity begins to fracture. Exactly as planned. But something unexpected happens. Spartacus doesn't react with anger. He listens. He brings them together. He forces truth into the open. And just like that, the cracks begin to close. Ashur watches, stunned. This shouldn't happen. This isn't how men work. But Spartacus isn't playing the same game. He's changing the rules. And for the first time, Ashur feels it. He might lose control. That night, Ashur moves faster. No more slow manipulation. He needs something bigger, something that can't be undone. He returns to the boy, still hidden, still afraid. Ashur kneels again, but this time there's no softness, only purpose. I need you to deliver something, he says. The boy hesitates. Ashur leans closer. If you want your father's death to mean something, the words cut. The boy nods. Hooked again. Ashur hands him a small object. Simple, deadly. Give it to Spartacus. The next day, the camp holds its breath. Because something is about to happen, Spartacus stands among his men. The boy approaches. Small, innocent, invisible. He hands it over. Spartacus takes it. Confused, curious. He opens it, and everything changes. Inside, a symbol. Roman, hidden among the slaves. Proof. Or at least, it looks like proof. That someone close to him is betraying them all. Silence spreads. Heavy, crushing. Eyes turn. Suspicion ignites again. But this time, it's bigger, stronger, impossible to ignore. Ashur watches from the shadows. This is it. This will break him. This will shatter everything Spartacus built. But then, Spartacus looks up. Not at the crowd. Not at the crowd. Not at his men. At Ashur. Directly. Like he's known all along. And in that moment, Ashur feels something he hasn't felt in a long time. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Exposure. Like the game he's been playing is about to turn on him. The world narrows to a single moment. Spartacus is looking at him, not guessing, not suspecting, knowing. Ashur feels it hit, sharp, sudden, like a blade sliding between ribs. For a second, just one, his breath falters. This wasn't supposed to happen. The plan was flawless. The fracture was spreading. Control was his again. So how does Spartacus see through it? Silence grips the camp. Men wait, watching their leader, waiting for anger, for punishment, for blood. But Spartacus doesn't give it. He closes his hand around the object, tight, then steps forward, slow, deliberate, straight toward Ashur. Every instinct screams, move, leave, disappear. But he doesn't. He can't. Running now would confirm everything. So he stands, still, cold. Spartacus stops just inches away, close enough to feel his breath, close enough that the noise of the camp fades into nothing. You think this is power? Spartacus says quietly. Not loud, not for others, just for him. Ashur says nothing. Because words feel dangerous now? Spartacus lifts the object slightly between them. Turning men against each other? A pause. Then, that's how they win. The words hit deeper than any blade. Because Ashur knows who they are. And for the first time, the line blurs. You serve them? Spartacus continues, eyes locked, unbreaking. But you're still one of us. No? Ashur feels the resistance instantly. Sharp, defiant. He's not one of them. He survived because he's different, because he doesn't believe in hope, because he understands truth. But then, a flicker. The boy, the gladiator, that look, disappointment. Ashur pushes it down. Hard. This is manipulation. Nothing more. Spartacus is trying to turn him, just like he turns everyone else. I serve myself. Ashur finally says, voice steady again. Controlled. Safe. Spartacus studies him, then nods, like he expected that answer. Then choose carefully, he says, and steps back. Just like that. No accusation, no exposure, nothing. And somehow, that's worse. Because now the doubt isn't in the camp, it's in Ashur. The moment breaks. Voices rise again. Confusion spreads. But Spartacus moves on, already pulling his men together, already repairing the damage. And Ashur, he stands there, frozen, because the game didn't go the way it was supposed to. It shifted. Again, that night, everything explodes. Not slowly, not quietly, all at once. A shout. Then another. Steel clashes, not in training, but in fury. The rebellion ignites. Ashur rushes through chaos. Firelight flickers. Shadows twist. Men he once watched now fight like animals unleashed. Guards fall. Chains break. The impossible is happening. Spartacus didn't fracture. He united. Stronger than before. Ashur stops, breathing hard, watching it unfold. This is it. The moment everything changes. The moment sides are chosen. A guard runs past him, then drops, cut down from behind. A gladiator grabs Ashur's arm. Fight. Ashur pulls free. Fight? For what? For them? For Rome? For survival? Everything collides in his mind, too fast, too loud. And then he sees the boy, caught in the chaos, alone, terrified, frozen as fire spreads closer. Ashur doesn't think. He moves, through the noise, through the danger, grabs him, pulls him away just as a beam crashes where he stood seconds before. The boy clings to him, shaking, alive. Ashur looks down at him and something cracks. Because this isn't strategy, this isn't manipulation, this is choice. A shout behind him. Ashur turns. Spartacus, standing in the firelight, sword in hand, blood on his skin, eyes burning with something unstoppable. Freedom. Come with us, Spartacus calls. Not an order, an offer. Ashur's heart pounds, louder than the chaos, louder than the screams. This is the moment. Everything he's built, everything he survived, balanced on a single decision. Stay who he is, or become something else. The boy tightens his grip on him. Spartacus waits. Not forever. Just long enough. Ashur looks between them. Between power and something he doesn't fully understand. And for the first time, he hesitates. Ashur doesn't answer. Not immediately. The world burns around him. Steel, fire, screams. But none of it feels as loud as the silence inside his own head. Spartacus stands there waiting, not pushing, not forcing, just giving him the choice. And that's what makes it unbearable. Because Ashur has spent his entire life without one. The boy clings tighter, small hands gripping his arm like it's the only solid thing left in a collapsing world. Ashur looks down at him, then back at Spartacus. Freedom. The word feels foreign. Dangerous. For men like Spartacus, it's purpose. For men like Ashur, it's risk. A shout cuts through the moment. Roman soldiers flooding in from the far gate. Reinforcements. Organized. Ruthless. Time's up. Spartacus turns, already moving, already leading his people toward escape. He doesn't look back. Because he won't wait forever. Ashur stands there 1 second longer. Then, he moves. But not toward Spartacus. Not fully. He grabs the boy, pulling him into the shadows instead. Away from the fire. Away from the fighting. Survival. Instinct wins. It always has. They slip through broken corridors, past bodies, past dying men who once held power and now clutch at nothing. The night air hits them hard as they break free of the structure. Cold, real, alive. The sounds of rebellion fade behind them, but not completely, because something has changed. Inside him. Ashur sets the boy down near the edge of the desert. Safe. As safe as this world allows. Go, he says. The boy hesitates, eyes searching his. Go, Ashur repeats, firmer this time. The boy runs, disappears into darkness. And just like that, Ashur is alone again. But it doesn't feel the same. He turns back, toward the fire, toward the chaos, toward something he walked away from. His jaw tightens. Did he choose wrong? No. There is no wrong. Only survival. But the thought lingers anyway, like a splinter he can't pull out. Days pass. The rebellion spreads. Rome responds. Hard, fast, merciless. Ashur adapts. Of course he does. He returns to what he knows. Information, leverage, positioning himself where power gathers again. Roman camps, war councils, whispers of strategy. He becomes useful, valuable. Again. But something is different now. When he hears Spartacus's name, it doesn't sound like a target anymore. It sounds like a force, unstoppable. And deep down, Ashur knows the truth. He had a chance to be part of that, and he let it go. One evening, as the sun bleeds red across the horizon, Ashur stands beside a Roman commander overlooking the battlefield. Smoke rises in the distance, evidence of another clash, another loss, or victory. It depends who you ask. "They're growing stronger," the commander mutters. Ashur says nothing, because he already knows. "They need to be crushed," the man continues. A pause. Then he turns to Ashur. "You understand how they think." Not a question, a statement. Ashur meets his gaze. Calm, controlled. Yes, and that's the truth, because he's seen it, felt it, almost chosen it. "Then help us end it," the commander says. There it is again, another choice, another line. Ashur looks out at the horizon, at the fading light, at the place where rebellion still breathes, and for a moment, just a moment, he imagines a different version of himself, standing there, not alone, not calculating, but fighting for something beyond survival. The image fades quickly. It has to, because that version of him doesn't survive long. Ashur exhales slowly. The cold focus returns. The armor rebuilds, piece by piece. "I will," he says. Simple, final. But as the words leave his mouth, something inside him stays behind. Back there, in the fire, in the moment, he hesitated. And maybe that's the part of him that will never stop wondering. What if he had chosen differently? The wind picks up, carrying distant echoes, not of war, of voices, of a name that refuses to die. Spartacus. Ashur closes his eyes briefly, then turns away, walking back toward power, toward survival, toward the life he understands. But this time, it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like something else entirely. Something quieter, heavier, like surviving came at a cost he'll never be able to repay. There's something almost poetic about returning to the brutal, blood-soaked world of Spartacus, House of Ashur, a franchise that never did subtlety, never aimed for restraint, and never apologized for either. But this time, the story shifts perspective. Not the rebel, not the hero, the survivor, the opportunist. Ashur. And that single creative pivot tells you everything about the vision behind this continuation. The original Spartacus series, spearheaded by Stephen S. DeKnight, was always more than gladiator spectacle. It was about power, identity, and the illusion of control in a world built on violence. With House of Ashur, the creative DNA doesn't just continue, it mutates. DeKnight's storytelling has always thrived in moral gray zones, but here he leans fully into it. Ashur was never a hero. He was cunning, manipulative, often despicable, and yet undeniably compelling. Building an entire narrative around him signals a bold, creative philosophy. What happens when survival instincts replace ideals? That question becomes the heartbeat of the project. Ashur, portrayed memorably by Nick E. Tarabay, was one of those characters audiences loved to hate, and secretly loved to watch. His arc in the original series ended definitively, which makes this revival concept even more intriguing. The show doesn't just resurrect a character, it reimagines a timeline where Ashur's story extends beyond what we thought was his final chapter. That kind of narrative revision isn't just fan service, it's a deliberate creative risk. Because once you alter fate, you're no longer continuing a story, you're rewriting its philosophy. And DeKnight has always been fascinated by the idea that history isn't fixed, it's interpreted. Look back at his work, including projects like Daredevil, and you'll notice a pattern: protagonists who are deeply flawed, systems that are inherently corrupt, and violence that feels less like spectacle and more like consequence. In Spartacus, that violence was stylized, slow-motion blood sprays, operatic combat, but beneath it was something darker, the cost of power. In House of Ashur, that cost becomes personal, because Ashur doesn't fight for freedom, he fights to climb. And climbing, in Rome, always means stepping on someone else. What makes this spin-off particularly compelling is its shift in narrative lens. The original Spartacus was built on rebellion, the uprising of slaves, the dream of liberation. It had a tragic hero at its center. Here, that moral clarity disappears. Ashur isn't fighting against the system, he thrives within it. That inversion transforms the tone entirely. Instead of asking, "Can freedom be won?" the story asks something far more uncomfortable: what are you willing to become to survive? That's not a heroic journey, that's a psychological descent. From a production standpoint, returning to this world also means revisiting one of television's most distinctive visual identities. The original series, developed under the banner of Starz, embraced a hyper-stylized aesthetic, inspired heavily by graphic novels and films like 300. Green screen environments, heightened color palettes, and exaggerated violence created a world that felt mythic rather than historical. It wasn't trying to be Rome as it was Rome as legend. And that stylistic choice matters, because when reality is heightened, character psychology has room to become operatic. Expect House of Ashur to double down on that. But here's the interesting twist. Ashur isn't a larger-than-life warrior. He's not Spartacus. He doesn't dominate through strength. He survives through manipulation. That means the visual storytelling has to evolve alongside the character. Less brute force spectacle, more tension, less battlefield chaos, more calculated danger. The violence won't disappear. It can't in this universe, but its meaning shifts. It becomes a tool, not just a display. That's a subtle but crucial evolution in creative direction. There's also a deeper thematic layer at play. The original series explored freedom versus oppression. This one explores power versus identity. Ashur constantly reinvents himself. Slave, gladiator, informant, strategist. But beneath all those roles is a man who never truly belongs anywhere. That outsider status becomes fertile ground for storytelling, because someone who doesn't belong isn't bound by the same moral codes. And that's where things get dangerous. What makes DeKnight's vision compelling is his refusal to simplify characters. Even at their worst, they're understandable. Even at their most manipulative, they're human. Ashur isn't evil for the sake of it. He's a product of a world where morality is a luxury few can afford. That perspective doesn't excuse his actions, but it reframes them. And that reframing is where great drama lives. Because the audience is forced into an uncomfortable position, you understand him, maybe even root for him. And that says something about you. That tension between repulsion and fascination is likely to define the entire series. Of course, none of this works without a strong foundational narrative. Vision alone doesn't carry a story. It needs structure, conflict, and evolution. And that brings us to the next critical layer beneath this brutal, morally complex world, the writing itself. Because the way this story is constructed, the choices in structure, dialogue, and narrative direction will determine whether House of Ashur becomes a worthy extension or just an echo of what came before. And trust me, the way this script came together is a story in itself. The most fascinating thing about House of Ashur isn't just that it exists, it's how it had to justify its own existence on the page first. Because once you decide to resurrect a character whose fate felt sealed, the writing has to do something very delicate. It has to convince you that this story needed to be told. Not could be told. Needed. And that's where the screenwriting approach becomes the real battleground. At the center of this narrative construction is Stephen S. DeKnight again, returning not just as a creative overseer, but as the architect of this alternate continuation. His writing style has always leaned into heightened drama dialogue that feels almost Shakespearean, dripping with metaphor, rhythm, and menace. Think back to the original Spartacus series. Characters didn't just speak, they declared. Every line carried weight, often balancing brutality with poetry. That signature doesn't disappear here. If anything, it becomes sharper. Because Ashur isn't a man of action in the traditional sense, he's a man of words. His greatest weapon has always been language. Lies wrapped in truth. Truth twisted into manipulation. So the writing has to reflect that. Dialogue isn't just exposition, it's strategy. Every conversation becomes a negotiation. Every sentence a calculated move in a larger game of survival. And that shifts the entire storytelling rhythm. Less physical escalation, more psychological tension. But here's the real challenge. The script faces structure. The original Spartacus followed a relatively classical arc. Rise, rebellion, tragedy. It had clear emotional anchors. Spartacus himself was the audience's moral compass. Remove that, and suddenly the narrative floats in murkier waters. Ashur doesn't offer easy identification, so the writers have to build a different kind of engagement, one rooted in intrigue rather than empathy. And that's where the concept of alternate history comes into play. By extending Ashur's story beyond its original endpoint, the series essentially creates a what-if timeline. What if Ashur survived? What if his ambition didn't end in defeat? This isn't just a gimmick, it's a structural reset. It allows the writers to explore consequences that were never originally intended, giving them freedom while still being tethered to established canon. But freedom comes with risk. Because once you deviate from established continuity, every narrative decision is under scrutiny. The writing has to feel both surprising and inevitable. If it leans too far into fan service, it loses credibility. If it strays too far from the original tone, it alienates its core audience. That balance between honoring the past and redefining it is where the real craftsmanship lies. And early indications suggest the writers are leaning heavily into political intrigue. Rome, in the Spartacus universe, was always a chessboard. Senators, generals, slaves, gladiators, everyone maneuvering for position. But with Ashur at the center, that chess game becomes even more personal. He's not born into power, he infiltrates it, which means the story naturally gravitates towards schemes, alliances, betrayals. The slow burn of manipulation rather than the immediate payoff of combat. Think less battlefield, more backroom. That also affects pacing. The original series thrived on explosive set pieces, arena fights, rebellions, large-scale conflict. Here, the tension is likely to build differently. Conversations carry stakes, decisions ripple outward. A single betrayal might matter more than an entire battle sequence. It's a quieter form of storytelling, but potentially more dangerous. Because when violence finally erupts, it feels earned. And then there's the question of character evolution. Ashur, as previously written, was reactive. He adapted to survive. But a protagonist, especially one leading a series, needs forward momentum. He needs goals, not just instincts. So the script has to elevate him from opportunist to strategist. That means giving him a vision, however twisted it may be. Power, security, legacy. Something that drives him beyond immediate survival. Without that, the story stalls. The writers also face another interesting challenge: how much of the original tone to preserve. The Spartacus series was known for its excess violence, sexuality, heightened emotion. It wasn't subtle, and it didn't want to be. But television has evolved. Audience expectations have shifted. Prestige dramas now lean more toward grounded realism, even when dealing with historical settings. So does House of Ashur adapt, or does it double down? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, retaining the stylistic boldness while refining the narrative depth, keeping the intensity but giving it sharper purpose. Because what made Spartacus memorable wasn't just what it showed, it was how unapologetically it committed to its identity. And that identity now has to evolve without losing itself. One of the most intriguing aspects of the writing is how it handles morality, or rather, the absence of it. In most narratives, even anti-heroes have lines they won't cross. Ashur doesn't really have those, which creates a unique storytelling dynamic. The tension doesn't come from whether he'll do the right thing. It comes from wondering just how far he'll go, and whether there's anything left of him when he gets there. That kind of character demands careful writing. Push too far, and he becomes irredeemable. Hold back, and he loses what makes him compelling. The balance is razor thin, but when it works, it creates something rare. A protagonist you don't trust, but can't look away from. And that's exactly the kind of storytelling that lingers. Because at the end of the day, scripts aren't just about plot, they're about perspective. And House of Ashur is built on one radical idea: what if the villain got to tell the story? Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Because no matter how strong the writing is, it only comes alive through the people chosen to embody it. And the casting choices behind this series, who returns, who joins, and who almost did, reveal an entirely different layer of storytelling before the camera even starts rolling. Casting Spartacus, House of Ashur was never going to be a routine process. This isn't a fresh IP where you can build from scratch. It's a return to a world that already has a pulse, a memory, and a fiercely loyal audience. And at the center of that expectation sits one unavoidable truth: if Ashur doesn't work, nothing works. Which makes the return of Tenika Davis not just important, it's absolutely essential. Tarabay didn't just play Ashur in the original Spartacus series, he defined him. That slippery mix of desperation, intelligence, and barely concealed fear, it wasn't something you could easily replicate with another actor. Recasting would have been a disaster. Because Ashur isn't iconic in the traditional sense, he's specific. His mannerisms, his voice, the way he lingers on certain words like he's always calculating 3 moves ahead, that's performance, not just character writing. And here's the fascinating part: Tarabay's original portrayal was never meant to carry a franchise. Ashur was designed as a supporting character, a narrative disruptor, someone who complicates the hero's journey, not replaces it. But audiences responded differently. Every time he appeared, the energy shifted. You didn't trust him, but you leaned in. That kind of reaction is rare. It's not likability, it's magnetism. And casting a spin-off around that kind of energy is both brilliant and risky. Because what works in small doses has to evolve to sustain a full narrative. That means Tarabay isn't just returning, he's recalibrating. The performance has to expand. Ashur can't remain a purely reactive character. He needs layers we haven't seen before. Vulnerability, perhaps, or at least the illusion of it. Because a lead character, even an anti-hero, needs dimension beyond manipulation. And that's where casting becomes more than just bringing someone back. It becomes about rediscovering them. But a show like this doesn't live or die on one performance alone. The real intrigue lies in the ensemble built around him. The original Spartacus thrived on its supporting cast characters. Like Batiatus and Lucretia weren't just side players, they were narrative engines. They created tension, conflict, unpredictability. So House of Ashur has to recreate that ecosystem, not by copying it, but by building new dynamics that challenge Ashur in ways we haven't seen before. Because, here's the thing, Ashur is most interesting when he's outmatched, when he's cornered, when his usual tricks don't quite work. That means the casting needs to introduce characters who can outmaneuver him, politically, intellectually, maybe even emotionally. And those roles require actors who can command presence without overpowering the central narrative. It's a delicate balance. Too weak, and Ashur dominates too easily. Too strong, and the show loses its focus. Chemistry becomes everything. And not just romantic or friendly chemistry. Strategic chemistry. The kind where every interaction feels like a negotiation, a power struggle wrapped in conversation. That's what made the original series so addictive. You weren't just watching events unfold, you were watching people try to outthink each other in real time. There's also the question of legacy casting. Do you bring back familiar faces? Even in limited roles? That decision carries weight, because nostalgia can be powerful, but it can also be distracting. Every returning character risks pulling attention away from the new narrative, but when used correctly, it can deepen the world, reinforce continuity, and reward longtime viewers. The key is restraint. Appearances need to serve the story, not just the audience's memory. And then there are the near misses, the actors who almost stepped into this world. While specific audition details haven't been publicly detailed, productions like this always go through extensive casting considerations. Different interpretations of characters, different energies tested against each other. Somewhere out there are alternate versions of this show where Ashur interacts with entirely different personalities, different rhythms, and those unseen possibilities shape the final product more than we realize. Because casting isn't just about who gets the role, it's about who doesn't and why. Another layer worth considering is physicality. The Spartacus universe has always been intensely physical bodies as instruments of power, status, survival. But Ashur exists slightly outside that paradigm. He's not the strongest man in the room. He never was. His power comes from intellect, not muscle. So the casting around him has to visually reinforce that contrast. Put him next to warriors, giants, people who dominate through presence alone. And suddenly, his cunning becomes more pronounced. That visual storytelling casting as contrast is subtle but incredibly effective. It reminds the audience, without a single line of dialogue, that Ashur wins differently, not through strength, but through strategy. And that difference is what sets this series apart from its predecessor. There's also an emotional component that casting needs to unlock. Ashur, for all his manipulation, isn't empty. There's fear there, insecurity, a constant awareness of how fragile his position is. The right supporting cast can bring that out, not by softening him, but by challenging him in ways that expose those cracks. And those moments, when the mask slips even slightly, are where the character becomes truly compelling. Because perfection is boring. Flaws are fascinating. Ultimately, the casting of House of Ashur reflects a clear philosophy. Don't rebuild what worked. Recontextualize it. Keep the core, but change the dynamics. Let familiar elements exist in unfamiliar ways. And, most importantly, trust that the audience is ready to follow a character who doesn't ask for sympathy, only attention. Because once the actors step into these roles, once the chemistry ignites and the dynamics take shape, everything else, the visuals, the dialogue, the story, starts to orbit around them. Performance becomes the lens through which we experience this brutal, political, unpredictable world. And at the center of that lens is a man who lies, manipulates, and survives. Now the real question is, how do those performances actually hold up when the camera starts rolling? Because casting is only potential. What matters is execution. And when it comes to the lead performances in this series, there's a lot more happening beneath the surface than you might expect. The first time Ashur reappears on screen in Spartacus, House of Ashur, everything hinges on a single question. Does he still command your attention the way he used to? Not through spectacle, not through violence, through presence and Nick E. Tarabay answers that question almost immediately. What made Tarabay's original performance so effective wasn't volume. It was precision. He never overplayed Ashur. He measured him. Every glance lingered just a second longer than expected. Every smile carried a hint of calculation. And here, that same controlled energy evolves into something deeper. Because this time, Ashur isn't reacting to power. He's chasing it. That subtle shift transforms the entire performance. You're not watching a man survive anymore. You're watching him build. And that requires a different kind of intensity. Tarabay leans into restraint. Where other characters in this universe explode with emotion, Ashur compresses it. His anger doesn't erupt, it simmers. His fear doesn't show, it flickers. Watch his eyes in moments of tension. They don't widen, they narrow. Processing, calculating, always thinking ahead. That internalization creates a performance that feels dangerous in a completely different way from the brute force dominance we're used to in this world, because unpredictability is its own form of power. What's especially compelling is how Tarabay handles Ashur's duality. Public versus private. In front of others, he's composed, almost theatrical. His words carefully chosen, his tone controlled. But in quieter moments, when the mask slips just slightly, you catch glimpses of something else. Not redemption, not quite vulnerability, but awareness. He knows exactly what he is, and he's made peace with it. That self-awareness adds weight to every decision he makes. Because nothing feels accidental. Every betrayal, every alliance, every calculated risk, it all feels intentional. And that level of performance control isn't easy. It requires an actor to fully understand not just the character, but the game the character is playing. Tarabay isn't just acting. He's strategizing. Now here's where things get interesting, because a performance like this only truly comes alive in contrast. Ashur doesn't exist in isolation. He's defined by the people around him. And the lead dynamics in this series are built on tension, not harmony. There's no traditional partner character here, no equal footing. Instead, every relationship feels uneven, shifting, constantly depending on who has the upper hand in any given moment. That instability creates incredible acting opportunities. In scenes where Ashur is outmatched, politically, physically, or socially, you see a completely different energy from Tarabay. His posture changes. His voice softens slightly. He becomes more agreeable, more accommodating, but it never feels submissive. It feels tactical, like he's bending just enough to avoid breaking. And that's where the performance becomes fascinating, because you're always watching two versions of Ashur at once, the one presenting himself and the one calculating beneath the surface. That layered acting approach demands equally strong performances from the actors opposite him, and when those scenes hit, they really hit. Because the tension isn't just in the dialogue, it's in what's not being said. Pauses stretch, eye contact lingers, silence becomes loaded. This is where the series moves beyond its origins. The original Spartacus often thrived on heightened emotion characters expressing rage, passion, loyalty in bold, almost operatic ways. And while that energy still exists, House of Ashur introduces something more controlled, more psychological. The performances aren't just about what characters feel, they're about what they hide, and hiding takes skill. There are moments, small ones, easy to miss, where Tarabay lets the facade crack just enough to remind you of the man underneath. A hesitation before a decision, a flicker of doubt in an otherwise confident exchange. These aren't big, showy acting beats, they're precise, intentional, and they ground the character in something real. Because without those moments, Ashur risks becoming one note. And that's the tightrope this performance walks. Make him too calculating, and he becomes mechanical. Too emotional, and he loses the edge that defines him. Tarabay finds that balance by never fully committing to either extreme. Ashur is always in between confidence and fear, control and chaos, ambition and survival. That in-between space is where the performance lives. There's also a physical component worth noting. Ashur isn't a traditional warrior, but that doesn't mean he's passive. Tarabay uses movement differently. Less aggression, more positioning. He places himself strategically within scenes, closer when he needs influence, further when he needs distance. Even his stillness feels deliberate, like he's conserving energy for the right moment. It's a performance built on awareness of space, and that kind of detail elevates everything around it. Of course, no lead performance exists in a vacuum. Chemistry plays a crucial role here, not the kind built on friendship or romance, but on tension. Conflict-driven chemistry. The push and pull between characters who don't trust each other but need each other. Those interactions become the backbone of the series, and Tarabay thrives in them. Because Ashur is most alive when he's in danger. Not physical danger, that's almost secondary. Social danger. Political danger. The risk of losing position, influence, control. That's where the performance sharpens, where every word matters, where every reaction is calculated. And when those scenes land, you feel it. Not as spectacle, as pressure. What ultimately makes this performance work is its consistency. There are no shortcuts. No moments where the character feels like he's stepping outside himself for dramatic effect. Everything flows from the same core understanding. Ashur survives by thinking, not by feeling. And yet, somehow, you feel everything anyway. That's the paradox of the performance. You don't trust him, you probably shouldn't like him, but you can't look away. Because every scene carries the promise that something is about to shift, that the balance of power is about to change, and Ashur is always at the center of that shift. But even the most compelling lead needs support, needs a world of characters pushing back, challenging, complicating every move. And when that supporting cast steps into focus, the series reveals just how carefully constructed its ensemble really is. Because this isn't just Ashur's story. It's the story of everyone trying to outplay him. If Ashur is the mind of Spartacus, House of Ashur, then the supporting cast becomes the pressure that constantly tests it. And what's fascinating here is how the ensemble isn't built to support him in the traditional sense. It's built to destabilize him. Because a character like Ashur only becomes compelling when the world pushes back. The original Spartacus understood this perfectly. Characters like Batiatus and Lucretia didn't just exist alongside the protagonist. They competed for narrative dominance. They had their own ambitions, their own agendas, their own manipulations unfolding in parallel. That same philosophy carries into House of Ashur, but with a sharper edge. Here, everyone feels like a potential threat, and that changes how performances interact. Instead of clear hierarchies, master and servant, leader and follower, you get fluid dynamics. Power shifts from scene to scene, sometimes within the same conversation. One moment, Ashur holds control. The next, it slips. That constant instability creates a kind of ensemble chemistry that feels alive, unpredictable. You're not watching characters play roles, you're watching them play each other. What makes the supporting performances stand out is their refusal to be overshadowed. These aren't passive characters reacting to Ashur's schemes. They're actively disrupting them. Politicians who see through his manipulation. Warriors who don't respect his intellect. Figures of authority who tolerate him only as long as he's useful. And usefulness, in this world, expires quickly. That tension gives supporting actors something incredibly valuable: agency. Each character operates with their own internal logic, their own goals, their own limits. And when those goals intersect with Ashur's, the scenes ignite. Because no one is there just to move the plot forward, they're there to win. Even if winning means someone else loses. Especially if it means that. There's also a noticeable shift in how the ensemble handles dialogue. In the original series, exchanges often leaned into theatrical intensity, bold declarations, sharp insults, heightened emotion. That style still exists, but here it's more controlled, more surgical. Supporting characters don't just respond to Ashur, they anticipate him. And that anticipation creates friction. You can feel it in the pauses, in the way a line is delivered just slightly slower than expected, in the moments where a character chooses not to speak at all. Silence becomes strategy. And when multiple characters are playing that same game, the result is a kind of dramatic tension that doesn't rely on action. It builds toward it. Because when words fail, violence follows. One of the most effective elements of this ensemble is contrast. Not just in personality, but in presence. You have characters who dominate, physically commanding attention the moment they enter a scene. And then you have characters who operate more subtly, controlling the room without raising their voice. Place those two types together, and something interesting happens. Ashur, caught between them, has to adapt constantly. And adaptation is where his character thrives, but also where it's most vulnerable. The supporting cast amplifies that vulnerability by refusing to play predictable roles. Allies aren't loyal. Enemies aren't always obvious. Relationships shift based on circumstance, advantage, survival. That fluidity keeps the narrative from settling into comfort. There's no safe dynamic, no guaranteed alliance. Every connection feels temporary, and that impermanence adds weight to every interaction. There are also standout moments where supporting performances briefly take control of the narrative, not by overpowering Ashur, but by exposing him, calling his bluff, forcing him into corners where his usual tactics don't work. Those scenes are crucial because they prevent the character from becoming invincible, and invincibility is the death of tension. What's particularly compelling is how the ensemble reflects different facets of power. Some characters wield it through authority, others through fear, others through loyalty or influence. Each approach challenges Ashur in a different way, forcing him to constantly reassess his strategy. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about adaptation at scale. The ensemble also benefits from a sense of lived-in history. Even when characters are newly introduced, they feel like they belong in this world. That comes from performance choices. Small details, mannerisms, the way characters carry themselves. You believe they've existed long before the story began. And that belief deepens immersion. Because the world doesn't feel built around Ashur, it feels like he's navigating something much larger than himself. There's a particularly interesting dynamic in how the supporting cast handles moral ambiguity. Just like Ashur, very few characters operate on clear ethical lines. But unlike him, some still cling to fragments of principle. That contrast creates friction, moments where ideology clashes with pragmatism. And those clashes are where the drama sharpens, because when someone with principles meets someone without them, the outcome is never simple. The ensemble also plays a crucial role in pacing. In a story driven heavily by dialogue and political maneuvering, supporting characters become the engines that keep things moving. Their decisions create ripple effects. Their actions force reactions. They're not just part of the story, they drive it forward. And when that machine is working, the narrative never feels stagnant. Ultimately, what makes this supporting cast effective isn't just talent, it's purpose. Every character exists to challenge, complicate, or destabilize Ashur's journey, not to support it, not to validate it, but to test it, relentlessly. Because a character like Ashur doesn't grow in comfort, he evolves under pressure. And the ensemble provides that pressure from every angle, which brings us to the world they all inhabit. Because performances, no matter how strong, need a space to exist in, a physical environment that reinforces tone, theme, and identity. And in a series like this, where power is everything, the way that world is designed becomes just as important as the characters moving through it. Because in Rome, even the walls tell a story. What defines the world of Spartacus, House of Ashur, isn't just its violence or politics, it's how constructed everything feels, not artificial, but intentional. Every wall, every arena, every dimly lit corridor feels like it exists for a reason beyond aesthetics. And that's where the production design becomes more than background. It becomes storytelling. Because in this world, environment equals power. The original Spartacus series, developed under Starz, embraced a hyper-stylized visual identity that blurred the line between history and myth. Inspired heavily by graphic novel aesthetics and films like 300, it didn't aim for realism. It aimed for impact. Colors were exaggerated. Blood looked almost painterly. Sets felt heightened, like reality turned up to 11. House of Ashur inherits that DNA, but it refines it. There's a noticeable shift toward control. The world still feels stylized, but less chaotic, more deliberate. Spaces aren't just visually striking, they're strategically designed to reflect hierarchy. Larger rooms dominate smaller ones. Elevated platforms create literal and symbolic power positions. Even the way characters move through these spaces tells you who holds control in that moment. You don't need dialogue to understand dominance. The set tells you. Take interiors, for example. Roman villas, political chambers, private quarters. They're not just locations, they're psychological arenas. High ceilings dwarf certain characters, reinforcing their lack of authority. Tight, enclosed spaces amplify tension during negotiations. Light filters in selectively, illuminating some figures while leaving others partially obscured. It's visual manipulation, and it mirrors exactly what Ashur does with people. One of the most compelling aspects of the production design is how it handles contrast, public versus private, power versus vulnerability. The arenas where spectacle dominates are open, grand, almost theatrical. But the real story often unfolds in quieter spaces, hallways, rooms, corners where deals are made and alliances shift. That contrast creates rhythm. Because when the series moves from grand open environments to intimate, confined ones, the tone shifts instantly. The spectacle fades, the tension sharpens, and suddenly, a conversation feels more dangerous than a sword fight. That's design working hand in hand with narrative. Costume design plays an equally crucial role here. In a world where status is everything, what characters wear becomes an extension of who they are or who they want to be. Rich fabrics, layered garments, intricate detailing. These aren't just aesthetic choices. They signal power, wealth, influence. And for a character like Ashur, that's especially important, because he wasn't born into status, he acquires it, so his costumes evolve, subtly at first. Slight upgrades in material, more refined tailoring, changes that reflect his rising position. But there's always something slightly off, something that reminds you he doesn't quite belong in the world he's entering. And that tension is intentional, because no matter how much he climbs, the design never fully lets you forget where he came from. Props, too, carry narrative weight. Weapons aren't just tools, they're symbols. Ownership matters. Who holds what, when, and how? It all communicates power dynamics without a single word spoken. Scrolls, coins, goblets, objects of influence become extensions of control. Even something as simple as a chair placement can shift the balance in a scene, and that level of detail matters more than most viewers consciously realize. There's also a fascinating interplay between practical sets and digital enhancement. The Spartacus universe has always relied on a blend of both: physical environments, augmented by CGI to expand scale. But what makes it effective is restraint. The digital elements don't overwhelm the physical. They enhance it. That balance keeps the world grounded, even when it feels larger than life. Because if everything feels artificial, the stakes disappear. Another subtle but powerful design choice is color palette. The series leans heavily into deep reds, golds, and shadows, colors associated with power, wealth, and danger. But these colors aren't static. They shift depending on context. Warmer tones in moments of control. Cooler, harsher lighting when tension rises. Color becomes emotion, and emotion becomes atmosphere. There's also an underlying sense of decay woven into the design. Rome, for all its grandeur, never feels entirely stable. Walls show wear. Spaces feel lived in, not pristine. That subtle imperfection adds authenticity, but more importantly, it reinforces theme. Because power, in this world, is never permanent. It erodes, it shifts, it collapses. And the environment reflects that. What elevates the production design beyond mere visual appeal is how seamlessly it integrates with character psychology. Ashur moves through spaces differently than others. He doesn't dominate rooms physically, he navigates them, positions himself carefully, uses environment to his advantage. A pillar becomes cover, a distance becomes leverage. The world isn't just around him, it's something he uses. And that interaction between character and environment creates a dynamic that feels alive. Because the set isn't static, it responds, it shapes behavior, it influences decisions, it becomes part of the storytelling language. Ultimately, the production design of House of Ashur does something crucial. It reinforces the idea that power isn't just held, it's displayed. In architecture, in clothing, in objects, in space. Everything is a statement. And in a world where perception can be as dangerous as reality, those statements matter. But visual design is only half the equation, because how that world is captured, how the camera moves through it, how light interacts with it, how shots are composed, that's where the final layer of visual storytelling comes into play. And once the cinematography steps in, everything you've just seen starts to feel entirely different. There's a moment early on where the camera doesn't move for just a second longer than you expect. A conversation hangs in the air. No cuts, no distractions, just two characters locked in a silent power struggle. And that's when you realize something fundamental has shifted in Spartacus, House of Ashur. This isn't just a visual spectacle anymore, it's controlled. The cinematography in this series builds directly on the legacy of the original Spartacus, but with a clear evolution in intent. Back then, the camera often felt like a participant, sweeping through battles, diving into violence, embracing chaos. It was kinetic, aggressive, almost overwhelming at times. That style worked because the story demanded it. Rebellion isn't quiet, but Ashur's world, it's quieter, sharper, and the camera reflects that. Instead of constant motion, there's restraint. Shots linger, frames hold. The camera observes rather than attacks. And that subtle shift changes everything about how tension is built. Because when the camera stops moving, you start noticing what is moving. Eyes, hands, posture. Performance takes center stage. And suddenly, silence feels louder than action. Lighting plays a crucial role in this transformation. The series leans heavily into chiaroscuro, that dramatic interplay between light and shadow, turning nearly every scene into a visual metaphor. Faces are rarely fully illuminated. Half-lit expressions dominate, reinforcing the idea that no character is entirely transparent, especially Ashur. Light doesn't reveal truth here, it obscures it. There are moments where characters step into light mid-conversation, not for visibility, but for emphasis, like they're choosing when to be seen. And just as quickly, they retreat back into shadow. That push and pull creates a visual language of concealment and revelation. It's not just beautiful, it's intentional. Camera composition becomes another storytelling tool. Characters are frequently framed off-center, leaving negative space that feels uneasy, like something is missing, or about to enter. That imbalance mirrors the instability of the world itself. Power is never fixed, always shifting. Even in stillness, the frame feels tense. Close-ups are used sparingly, but when they arrive, they hit hard. The series doesn't rely on them constantly, which makes their impact stronger. When the camera finally moves in tight on a character's face, it's not just for emotion, it's for exposure. You're being forced to confront something the character would rather hide. And with someone like Ashur, that's dangerous territory. There's also a noticeable precision in camera movement. When the camera does move, it's rarely random. Slow tracking shots follow characters through corridors, not to show off the set, but to build anticipation. You feel like you're being led somewhere, toward a decision, a confrontation, a consequence. Nothing feels accidental. Even handheld shots, when used, serve a purpose. They introduce instability, subtle, controlled, but enough to create unease. It's not chaos like before. It's discomfort. A reminder that beneath the calculated conversations, violence is always waiting. And when it arrives, the cinematography shifts again. Action sequences still carry the DNA of the original series, stylized, impactful, visually heightened, but they're more focused now. Less about scale, more about clarity. You see the movement, you feel the impact, but it never loses coherence. The camera doesn't get lost in the chaos, it guides you through it. Because the story isn't about the fight itself, it's about what the fight means. Lens choices also play a subtle but important role. Wider lenses are often used in political or group scenes, capturing multiple characters within the same frame, visually reinforcing the idea that power is shared, contested, never isolated. But in more intimate moments, the lens tightens. Depth of field shrinks. Backgrounds blur, and suddenly, it's just you and the character. That shift pulls you into their perspective, whether you trust them or not. There's a particularly effective use of verticality in the framing as well. Characters positioned higher within the frame, on steps, platforms, elevated spaces, immediately feel dominant. But the series doesn't rely on this too heavily. Sometimes, a character in a lower physical position still controls the scene. And that contradiction is powerful, because it reminds you that in this world, power isn't always visible. One of the most impressive aspects of the cinematography is how it integrates with the production design. The two don't compete, they collaborate. Light interacts with texture. Shadows fall across detailed sets, enhancing depth. The camera doesn't just capture the environment, it explores it, and that exploration makes the world feel tangible. There's also a rhythm to how scenes are shot. Longer takes in dialogue-heavy sequences allow tension to build organically. Quicker cuts appear only when necessary, when urgency spikes, when control slips. That variation prevents visual fatigue and keeps the audience engaged on a subconscious level. You're not just watching the scene, you're feeling its pace. Ultimately, what the cinematography achieves is a recalibration of focus. It takes a universe known for excess and channels it into something more deliberate, more psychological, more precise. The spectacle is still there, but it's no longer the main attraction. Control is, and that control mirrors Ashur himself. Measured, calculated, always aware, but visuals alone can only carry so much weight. Because what you see is only half the experience. The other half, the part that seeps into your subconscious, that manipulates emotion without asking permission, comes from what you hear. And in a world this tense, this layered, this dangerous, sound becomes a weapon. What you hear in Spartacus, House of Ashur, is doing just as much work as what you see, maybe more. Because while the visuals create the world, the sound design controls how that world feels. And in a series built on tension, manipulation, and constantly shifting power, feeling is everything. The original Spartacus had a very distinct sonic identity. It wasn't subtle. Music swelled aggressively. Combat sounded exaggerated. Every strike, every impact heightened to match the visual style. It was immersive, yes, but also overwhelming by design. You weren't meant to sit comfortably in that world. House of Ashur takes a different route. It pulls back. And in doing so, it becomes far more dangerous. The score, while still rooted in orchestral tradition, leans into restraint. Instead of constant musical presence, there are stretches where the music almost disappears. And that absence? It matters. Because when sound drops out, your attention sharpens. Every footstep, every breath, every rustle of fabric suddenly feels amplified. Silence here isn't empty, it's loaded. There are scenes where two characters speak in low tones, and beneath them, there's barely any score at all, just ambient sound. The faint echo of a room, the distant murmur of activity outside. It creates a sense of realism, but more importantly, it creates tension. Because without music guiding your emotions, you're left to interpret the moment yourself, and that uncertainty keeps you on edge. When the score does come in, it's deliberate, controlled, often built around low, sustained tones rather than sweeping melodies. It doesn't tell you what to feel, it suggests it. A subtle rise in strings, a distant percussion rhythm that feels more like a heartbeat than a drum. It creeps in, and before you realize it, you're already affected by it. There's also a clever use of leitmotifs, recurring musical themes tied to specific characters or ideas. Ashur's presence, for instance, isn't announced with something grand or heroic. It's quieter, more unsettling. A motif that feels incomplete, almost unresolved, mirroring the character himself. Because Ashur is never fully stable, and neither is the music that follows him. Sound design, beyond the score, plays an equally critical role. This is where the series really sharpens its edge. Every environment has its own sonic texture. Open spaces carry echoes, giving dialogue a sense of scale. Enclosed rooms dampen sound, making conversations feel more intimate and more dangerous. You can hear the difference in power just by listening. Footsteps on stone versus footsteps on sand. The metallic clink of armor versus the soft rustle of fabric. These aren't just background details, they're cues. Indicators of status, presence, movement. Even before a character speaks, you often hear them, and that builds anticipation. Combat sequences, while still impactful, are handled with more precision than before. Instead of overwhelming the audience with layered sound, the design isolates key elements. The sharp crack of a strike, the intake of breath before impact, the brief silence right after. That last one matters most, because silence after violence forces you to sit with it. There's no immediate musical swell to cushion the blow, no auditory distraction, just consequence. And that choice makes every act of violence feel heavier, more real, even within a stylized world. Another fascinating element is the use of diegetic sound audio that exists within the world of the story. Music played during gatherings, ambient noise in public spaces, distant voices echoing through corridors. These sounds ground the series, making the environment feel lived in, but they also serve a narrative purpose. Because diegetic sound can mask or reveal intention. A conversation happening in a crowded space carries different stakes than one in silence. Secrets can hide in noise, or be exposed by the lack of it. The series uses this dynamic effectively, letting sound shape not just atmosphere, but strategy. And then there's voice. Delivery becomes part of the sound design. Characters don't just speak, they control how they're heard. Volume, tone, pacing, it's all intentional. Ashur, especially, uses this to his advantage. He rarely raises his voice. Doesn't need to. His power comes from precision, not force. And that makes every word land harder. Because when someone speaks softly in a tense environment, you lean in. You listen more closely. The audio mixing ties all of this together. Balance is key. Dialogue remains clear, but never isolated from its environment. Background sounds don't overwhelm, but they're always present. The world breathes, moves, exists beyond the characters, and that immersion deepens engagement. There's also a rhythm to how sound is used across episodes. Quiet builds, tension rises, sound layers gradually increase, and then release, either through silence or sudden impact. That ebb and flow mirrors the narrative structure itself, reinforcing emotional beats without drawing attention to the technique. You feel it without noticing it. And that's the mark of effective sound design. Ultimately, what House of Ashur achieves with its audio landscape is a shift in control. Instead of telling the audience how to feel, it creates conditions where emotion emerges naturally. Through absence, through subtlety, through precision, it trusts the viewer. And that trust pays off. Because in a story built on manipulation, the most powerful tool isn't always what's shown, it's what's suggested, what lingers, what echoes. Sound becomes that echo. But behind all of this, the performances, the visuals, the sound, there's a reality often more chaotic than anything on screen. Because creating a series like this isn't just about vision or execution, it's about navigating challenges, solving problems, and sometimes surviving the production itself. And the journey behind the scenes? That's where things get really interesting. Every polished frame, every calculated performance, every perfectly timed silence. It all hides something messier underneath. Because productions like Spartacus, House of Ashur don't come together smoothly. They're built through friction, through compromise, through problems that need solving in real time. And that's where the real story lives. Bringing this world back after years isn't just a creative decision, it's a logistical challenge. The original Spartacus series, produced under Starz, had already established a very specific production identity. Stylized visuals, heavy use of green screen, controlled studio environments. Recreating that isn't as simple as flipping a switch. Because technology has evolved, expectations have changed, and the production has to decide, replicate the past, or reinterpret it. From what emerges behind the scenes, the answer leans toward evolution. The team doesn't abandon the original style, but they refine the process. Digital environments are still heavily used, but with more precision. Better integration, lighting that matches more naturally. The goal isn't just scale, it's cohesion. Because audiences today notice inconsistencies instantly. There's also the challenge of tone. The original series thrived on excess, pushing boundaries in violence, sexuality, and visual style. But returning to that exact formula risks feeling outdated, so the production walks a tightrope, maintain identity without feeling like a relic. That balancing act affects everything from set construction to performance direction. And then there's scheduling. Productions of this scale are tightly coordinated machines, multiple departments working simultaneously: set design, costume, camera, VFX. One delay ripples across the entire system. And with a series that relies so heavily on controlled environments, even small disruptions can escalate quickly. A lighting setup takes longer than expected, the entire shooting day shifts. A costume adjustment runs late, scene timing changes. And suddenly, you're racing against the clock. But here's where things get interesting, because limitations often create innovation. When time is tight, decisions become sharper. Scenes are reworked on the fly. Dialogue gets trimmed. Blocking becomes more efficient. And sometimes, those adjustments lead to moments that feel more natural, more immediate than what was originally planned. Happy accidents. They're not planned, but they're often what elevate a scene. There's also the human element. Long shooting hours. Physically demanding environments. Even without constant large-scale battles, the world of Spartacus isn't easy to inhabit. Costumes are heavy. Sets are intense. Performances require emotional precision. And maintaining that day after day, that's endurance. What stands out is how the production seems to embrace collaboration rather than rigid control. Directors guide, but actors contribute. Adjustments happen in the moment. A line delivery changes, a reaction shifts, and sometimes those small choices reshape the entire tone of a scene. Because filmmaking, at its core, is fluid, not everything goes according to plan, and that's where it becomes interesting. There are also moments where technical challenges force creative solutions. A scene that doesn't quite work visually gets reimagined through lighting. A space that feels too large gets reframed through camera angles. Instead of fixing problems directly, the production often sidesteps them, finding alternative ways to achieve the same effect. And those solutions often feel more inventive than the original idea. Another layer of complexity comes from continuity. This isn't a standalone project. It's connected to an existing universe. That means every detail matters. Costume consistency, character behavior, visual tone. One misstep and the illusion breaks. So the production constantly checks itself. Does this feel like Spartacus? But also, does it feel like something new? That dual responsibility shapes every decision behind the scenes. And then there's the unpredictable nature of performance itself. An actor delivers a line differently than expected. A reaction lands harder than planned. Chemistry between actors shifts dynamically. Directors have to adapt in real time, capturing what works rather than forcing what was intended. Because sometimes, the best version of a scene isn't the one you wrote, it's the one that happens. What's particularly compelling about the production journey is how it mirrors the story being told. Just like Ashur navigates uncertainty, the production navigates its own version of controlled chaos. Plans shift, strategies change, outcomes aren't always predictable, but survival completion is the goal. And when everything comes together, all those unseen challenges disappear behind the final product. The audience doesn't see the delays, the adjustments, the compromises. They see a cohesive world, a seamless story, which is exactly the point. Because filmmaking, when it works, hides its own struggle. But here's where the conversation shifts from creation to consequence. Because no matter how much effort goes into making a series like this, its success, or failure, is ultimately measured by how it performs in the real world. Numbers, viewership, impact. And when House of Ashur finally steps into that arena, the results tell a story just as revealing as anything behind the scenes. The real test for Spartacus, House of Ashur, doesn't happen on set. It happens the moment it leaves the controlled environment of production and enters the unpredictable arena of audience reception. Because no matter how carefully crafted a series is, its commercial impact depends on something far less controllable: attention. And attention today is a battlefield. As a continuation of a known property under Starz, the series doesn't start from zero. It inherits a built-in audience, fans of the original Spartacus who've been waiting, some for years, to return to this world. That kind of legacy is valuable. It guarantees initial curiosity, early viewership, a baseline level of engagement that completely original projects have to fight much harder to achieve. But nostalgia only gets you through the door. It doesn't keep you there. That's where performance metrics become more complex. Unlike theatrical releases where success is measured in opening weekend box office, a series like this lives in a different ecosystem. Subscriptions, streaming numbers, completion rates, how many people start it, how many finish it, how quickly does word of mouth spread. Those numbers tell a story beyond simple popularity, because sustained engagement matters more than initial spikes. For House of Ashur, the biggest commercial question isn't just how many people watched, it's how many stayed. A show built on slow burn tension and political intrigue demands patience. And in an era of fast content consumption, patience is a risk. If the audience leans in, the series thrives. If they drift, it struggles. There's also the matter of brand positioning. The original Spartacus occupied a very specific niche, stylized historical drama with unapologetic intensity. It wasn't trying to appeal to everyone, and that specificity was part of its strength. But in today's market, where platforms compete aggressively for broad audiences, niche can be both an advantage and a limitation. Too broad, and you lose identity. Too niche, and you limit reach. House of Ashur walks that same line, but with added pressure. It has to satisfy longtime fans while also attracting new viewers who may not have experienced the original series. That dual targeting shapes marketing strategy, release patterns, even how the show is positioned on the platform. Because perception drives performance, there's also an interesting financial dynamic at play. While exact budget figures aren't publicly detailed, a common scenario with streaming and premium cable productions, the scale of the series suggests a significant investment. Period settings, detailed production design, visual effects integration, none of that comes cheap. So success isn't just about viewership, it's about return on investment. Does the series bring in new subscribers? Does it retain existing ones? Does it justify its production cost through engagement and longevity? These are the questions platforms like Starz prioritize, often more than raw viewing numbers. And then there's international reach. The original Spartacus found audiences beyond its primary market, partly because its themes, power, survival, rebellion, translate across cultures. House of Ashur, with its focus on ambition and manipulation, taps into something equally universal: the desire to rise, the fear of falling, the cost of both. That universality gives it potential, but execution determines whether that potential converts into global appeal. Another factor influencing commercial impact is competition. The landscape today is crowded: historical dramas, political thrillers, prestige series, all vying for the same audience attention. House of Ashur doesn't exist in isolation, it competes. And in that competition, differentiation becomes key. What makes this series stand out isn't scale, it's perspective. A story centered on a morally ambiguous character, driven by strategy rather than heroism, offers something distinct. But distinct doesn't always mean widely appealing. It means memorable. And sometimes that's enough. There's also the long tail effect to consider. Some series don't explode immediately, they grow. Word of mouth builds slowly. Audiences discover them over time. In that scenario, success isn't measured in opening weeks, but in sustained relevance. And a show like this, with layered storytelling and complex character dynamics, is well positioned for that kind of growth. Because it rewards attention, it invites rewatching, it lingers. Merchandising and ancillary revenue, while not the primary driver here, also play a role. The Spartacus brand carries recognizable imagery: gladiators, Roman iconography, stylized visuals that can translate into extended commercial opportunities. But again, those depend on cultural impact. Which brings us to the final, and perhaps most important metric: conversation. Is the series being talked about? Not just watched, but discussed, debated, interpreted. Because in the current media landscape, conversation amplifies reach. Social media, reviews, fan discussions, they all contribute to a show's visibility and longevity. And a character like Ashur, he invites conversation because he challenges audiences, makes them uncomfortable, forces them to engage with a perspective that isn't easy to align with. That kind of narrative friction often sparks debate, and debate drives attention. Ultimately, the commercial story of House of Ashur isn't just about numbers, it's about positioning, retention, conversation. The ability to carve out space in an increasingly crowded landscape. Because success today isn't defined by a single metric, it's defined by impact over time. But numbers and performance only tell part of the story. Because beyond financial success lies something far more unpredictable: how the series is received critically, culturally, emotionally. And when critics and audiences begin to weigh in, the narrative around House of Ashur takes on a life of its own. The reaction to Spartacus, House of Ashur, is where everything becomes unpredictable. Because once a series leaves the hands of its creators, it no longer belongs to them, it belongs to interpretation. Critics dissect it, audiences debate it, and somewhere between those two, its reputation begins to form. And with a show like this, that reputation was never going to be simple. From a critical standpoint, the series enters the conversation with both an advantage and a burden. The advantage? It's tied to a recognizable brand under Starz, a series that already proved its ability to stand out. The burden? Expectations shaped by that same legacy. Critics aren't just evaluating what's on screen, they're comparing it to what came before. And those comparisons can be unforgiving. Early critical responses tend to orbit around one central question: does focusing on a character like Ashur justify the shift in narrative perspective? Because this isn't a heroic journey. There's no clear moral center, and that alone divides opinion. Some critics lean into that ambiguity, praising the series for taking a risk, for refusing to repeat the familiar structure of rebellion and instead exploring ambition, manipulation, and survival from a darker angle. For them, this isn't just a continuation, it's an evolution. Others aren't as convinced. Because removing a traditional protagonist changes how audiences connect to the story. Without a clear emotional anchor, engagement becomes more intellectual than empathetic. You're watching strategy unfold, not necessarily rooting for a character to succeed. And that distinction matters. Audience reactions often reflect that divide even more sharply. Longtime fans of the original Spartacus come in with expectations, certain tones, certain rhythms, certain emotional beats. When those expectations are subverted, the response splits. Some appreciate the maturity, the restraint, the shift towards psychological tension. Others miss the immediacy, the visceral energy, the clear stakes of rebellion. And both responses are valid. Because House of Ashur isn't trying to replicate what worked before, it's trying to reinterpret it. There's also a noticeable conversation around pacing. Critics who favor slow-burn storytelling tend to respond more positively, highlighting the layered dialogue, the gradual escalation of tension, the emphasis on character over spectacle. For them, the series rewards patience. But for viewers expecting constant momentum, that same pacing can feel deliberate to a fault. Scenes linger. Conversations stretch. Conflict builds quietly. And not everyone has the patience for that. Performance, however, emerges as a consistent point of praise, especially Tarabay's return as Ashur. Even among more critical reviews, his portrayal often stands out as a defining strength. The nuance, the control, the ability to carry scenes through subtle shifts rather than overt emotion. It resonates, because regardless of narrative preference, strong performance is universal. There's also discussion around tone. The original Spartacus was unapologetically bold, violent, stylized, excessive. House of Ashur tempers that. Not completely, but noticeably. And that tonal shift becomes a point of debate. Some see it as refinement. Others see it as dilution. But what's undeniable is that the series feels more controlled. Less about spectacle, more about intention. And that change shapes how it's received. Culturally, the series taps into themes that resonate beyond its historical setting. Power structures, social mobility, the cost of ambition. These aren't confined to ancient Rome. They're universal. And that universality opens the door for broader interpretation. Ashur, in many ways, becomes a reflection of modern anxieties. The desire to rise in systems that aren't built for you. The compromises required to survive. The question of identity when success comes at the cost of integrity. Those themes spark conversation. Not always comfortable conversation, but meaningful. Social media, as always, amplifies these reactions. Clips circulate. Specific scenes become talking points. Debates emerge around character decisions, narrative direction, thematic interpretation. And in that space, the series takes on a life beyond its episodes. Because cultural impact isn't just about critical scores, it's about presence. Memes, discussions, analysis videos. These become extensions of the show itself, keeping it relevant beyond its initial release window. And a character like Ashur, with his complexity and moral ambiguity, lends himself particularly well to that kind of discourse. He's not easily defined, and that makes him interesting to talk about. There's also the long-term perspective to consider. Some series aren't fully appreciated in the moment. They're reevaluated over time, as audiences revisit them without the weight of expectation. House of Ashur feels like it could fall into that category. Because its strengths, subtlety, layered storytelling, character complexity, aren't always immediately satisfying. They unfold. And that kind of storytelling tends to age differently. Awards consideration, if it enters the conversation at all, would likely center around performance and possibly writing. Not because the series lacks technical merit, it doesn't, but because those elements stand out most clearly in a crowded field. Recognition, however, isn't always the goal. Impact is. And impact, in this case, is measured by how deeply the series embeds itself in conversation, how often it's referenced, revisited, debated. Whether it becomes a footnote in the Spartacus legacy or a defining extension of it, that answer doesn't arrive immediately. It develops. Because reception isn't static, it evolves as more people engage with the material, as perspectives shift, as time creates distance from expectation. Ultimately, House of Ashur exists in that space between admiration and debate. It's not universally embraced, it's not universally rejected, it's discussed. And sometimes that's more valuable. because a series that sparks conversation has already done something right. But beyond reception, beyond critics, audiences, numbers, and debates, there's a deeper question waiting to be answered. One that cuts through all the noise and gets to the core of what this series is really about. What does it mean? And more importantly, what does it leave behind? What Spartacus, House of Ashur ultimately leaves behind isn't a simple answer. It's a tension. A question that lingers long after the final scene fades. What does survival cost when there's nothing left to believe in except your own ambition? Because at its core, this series isn't about Rome. It isn't about gladiators, politics, or even power in the traditional sense. It's about identity, how it's shaped, how it's traded, and how easily it can be lost. Ashur begins as a man defined by circumstance, a slave, an outsider, someone constantly adapting to forces beyond his control. But over time, something shifts. He stops reacting, starts shaping, starts choosing, and those choices, they build him and break him. The series leans heavily into the idea that power isn't something you hold, it's something you perform. Every decision Ashur makes is, in some way, a performance. A calculated move designed to maintain position, to secure advantage, to stay one step ahead. But the deeper he goes, the harder it becomes to separate the act from the self. Who is Ashur without the game? That question never gets a clean answer, and that's exactly the point. One of the most compelling themes running through the series is the illusion of control. Characters believe they're in charge of situations, of people, of outcomes, but the narrative constantly undercuts that belief. Plans unravel, alliances shift, power slips. Control, in this world, is temporary, and the more desperately someone tries to hold on to it, the faster it erodes. Ashur understands this better than most. That's why he doesn't seek control in the traditional sense. He seeks position, flexibility, the ability to adapt when things inevitably change. But even that strategy has limits, because adaptation requires compromise, and compromise over time reshapes identity. The series doesn't present this as a tragedy in the classical sense. There's no singular downfall, no moment where everything collapses at once. Instead, it's gradual, incremental, a slow erosion of self that happens decision by decision. That kind of storytelling is quieter, but more unsettling. Because it feels real, there's also a recurring exploration of belonging, or rather, the lack of it. Ashur never truly fits anywhere, not among the elite, not among the oppressed. He exists between worlds, navigating both but belonging to neither. And that isolation becomes both his strength and his weakness. It allows him to move freely, to think differently, to operate outside traditional boundaries. But it also means there's no foundation beneath him, no identity he can fall back on when everything else shifts. He's always building, never rooted. And that constant instability defines his journey. The series also challenges the idea of morality, not by rejecting it, but by reframing it. In this world, morality isn't absent. It's contextual. What's right depends on where you stand, what you need, what you're willing to sacrifice. Ashur doesn't operate without morals. He operates with different ones. And that distinction forces the audience into an uncomfortable position, because at times, his choices make sense, not ethically, but logically. Within the rules of the world he inhabits, they're justified. And that's where the series becomes provocative, because it blurs the line between understanding and approval. Just because you understand a character doesn't mean you agree with them. But the closer you get to that line, the harder it becomes to maintain distance, and House of Ashur constantly pushes you toward it. Then there's the question of legacy. What does Ashur leave behind? Not in terms of power or position, but impact, influence, memory. The series doesn't offer a clear answer, but it suggests something more nuanced. Legacy isn't defined by what you achieve, but by how you're remembered. And Ashur, he's not remembered as a hero, but he's not forgotten either. And sometimes, that's enough. From a broader perspective, the series carves out a unique space within the Spartacus legacy. It doesn't try to replace the original narrative. It complements it, expands it, offers a different lens through which to view the same world. Where Spartacus was about breaking chains, House of Ashur is about navigating them. And that distinction matters, because it shifts the focus from external conflict to internal struggle, from physical battles to psychological ones, from freedom as an ideal to survival as a necessity. It's not a more hopeful story, but it might be a more honest one. As a viewing experience, the series isn't designed for easy consumption. It demands attention, patience, willingness to engage with characters who don't offer comfort or clarity. But for those who lean into it, there's a depth that rewards that investment. It stays with you, not because of spectacle, but because of implication. And that's where its real strength lies. In terms of strengths, the series excels in performance, atmosphere, and thematic complexity. It understands its character and builds everything around him with precision. It trusts its audience to keep up, to interpret, to question. Its weaknesses? They're tied to that same ambition. The pacing can feel deliberate to a fault. The lack of a traditional emotional anchor may distance some viewers, and its refusal to simplify can make it less immediately accessible. But those aren't failures. They're choices. And whether those choices work depends entirely on what you're looking for. If you want clear heroes and villains, this won't satisfy you. If you want layered characters, moral ambiguity, and a story that lingers in uncomfortable ways, it delivers. Ultimately, Spartacus, House of Ashur, isn't about glory, it's about survival. And survival, as the series makes painfully clear, isn't clean. It isn't noble. It doesn't guarantee happiness or redemption. It just means you're still here. And sometimes, in a world like this, that's the most dangerous victory of all.